The will of the pack is dead, and I will tell you why. We have believed for millennia now that the only true forces capable of ruling over the galaxy are those who are willful enough to stand by the will of the blade. We have crafted a culture, a society that cherishes this tradition, to live by the blade and to die by the blade. Strength is respected and weakness is cast out. That is how it should be, shouldn't it? We climb to the position of the apex predator, not by lounging about or writing poetry, but by seizing our strength, our brute force, and by clawing our way to the top. How else should society function? A democracy? The will of the sheep electing the weakest of the meek? A corporate oligarchy where the will of the coin outweighs the strength of the ruler? A theocracy where the misplaced faith in some intangible god is to save oneself? All of these governments have fallen to the will of the pack. Worlds raided, territories torn asunder, our claws ripping through flesh and steel alike. We have no equal in the field of battle, and we care not for the frivolousness that comes with contemporary civilization. That is, until we encountered them. They were everything we had dreamed of. Sheep, prey, so tightly packed into a neat little pen. A pen they called soul. They did not scatter like the rest of the prey, into the stars, on board tiny little habitats. No, they clumped together, like the prey of our old home, packed into caves and warrens that we would easily flush out for an easy feast. This humanity, as they called it, would suffer the same fate, and would surely bring about victory for my clan and my empire. Or so I thought. For that was our first mistake. I called upon their greatest champion. They sent us their weakest sickling. They presented us with an ultimatum, to halt our advances, to stop our expansion, to return to our homes. The arrogance of such a creature. A small sickly thing ordering the great Ithilhani to stop? It was laughable, and we slew their so-called envoy with ease. This was our second mistake. For as soon as their envoy was slain, so too would the ship worlds we carried to the outer reaches of Sol be destroyed. At the time, I reported them to the Emperor as merely disloyal renegades, leaving the greater pack for some smaller pirate band. On reflection, I now know this proclamation was done because I simply could not accept it. I simply could not accept the fact that such a sickly and small creature, with no honor and strength, could repel an armada that had in their prime taken down the Linolian Confederacy. This was our third mistake. We refused to see them for what they were, demons. Soon enough, the war spread to our conquered territories. One by one, they took away what we deemed as inconsequential losses. A trade port here, a commercial center there. They were taking what we considered to be useless civilian targets. Targets that we had lightly defended, for we saw no use for them. Weaklings, the lot of them. We prided ourselves in our greatest trophies, the great battleships and military hubs, the grand jewels that reaffirmed our strength. We allowed this, for the packs were full, and we knew we would merely reclaim them on our next raid. That was our fourth mistake. An army cannot march on an empty stomach, a human proverb I learned, but one that I did not much appreciate at first. Our usual tactics were simple: pillage and leave. We raid the weak, cripple their ability to defend themselves, assert our dominance, and make sure they pay tribute when we return. We had assumed the human occupation of these alien worlds would suffer the same crippling blow on our next raid. Yet they didn't. We arrived with battle groups and left with scrap. And what we saw before we left was impossible. What should have been cities razed and space stations left near uninhabited, left to subsistence, barely eking enough existence to resist, but enough to placate our coffers and food stores, were now bustling metropolises. Even larger, even more prosperous than the ones we found in our first raids. The humans, they were acting as nurses rather than as overlords or conquerors. How truly pathetic one must be to nurse a dying creature back to health. They truly were a shameful people, and yet they still managed to push us back. How? Why? Our rage grew increasingly unsated, and so we struck again. This time, with all the combined strengths of all the major packs. This was our fifth mistake. We entered just above Sol space, this time with no demands sent and no warning shot given. This was no longer a mere battle, but a war of annihilation and humiliation. Our fleets arrived, but upon seeing the heart of Sol, they saw nothing but emptiness and darkness. There was no star, even though we could detect its presence in our gravimetric readings. There was no light, yet our sensors and systems were overwhelmed with the cowardly attacks of 1,000,000,000,000 calculations per second. But then, as soon as we realized what was happening, we saw it. The light. And the light burned us all into asunder. There were no survivors that day. But a message remains that rattles even my battle-hardened soul. Decimus! Wait, what? I thought you said there was no sun. What is that light? It was at this point the galaxy began to fracture. Our grip was loosening, even as we clung to our possessions with an iron fist. Our tributaries were rebelling. We could not stop them. Because for every world that announces their independence, humanity's banner would soon reach them with their wretched velveted glove. During the chaos, we managed to capture one of the Linolian merchants who had indeed taken on a pilgrimage to Sol. This is what that sniveling weakling had to say. The humans, they don't even know about your war. The average human lives with only the barest of inklings as to what is happening beyond their sphere. They live in excess, and they enjoy their culture, and our culture too. We don't trade in resources as much as we do in our film, our games, our art, and our culture. They demand nothing but reward us for merely prospering. You're fools if you believe you can oppose them. Because while your lowest of the low slaves away on your hellships and mines, humanity's lowest continues to better themselves in the arts, sciences, and commerce. While the war has consumed you, humanity has barely felt a disruption in their day-to-day. Really, all you've done is made them mildly annoyed. The average human enjoys leisure, while the average Ithohani dies in the trenches bleeding it alone. The humans don't have warriors. They've automated war, optimized it, to a level none of you can match. Your insolence will be paid in blood, Linolian. And I am more than willing to do so, because at least I know I've avenged my ancestors by telling you the truth. That you and the rest of your kin have been relegated to the dustbin of history. Drenium slew the insolent worm a few moments after this recording. I could not believe their words. I could not force myself to believe it was true. The weak cannot triumph over the strong. One could not automate war. It was not possible. But the consequences of our failures could not be ignored any longer. My people began to starve, for the first time in our 2 millennia of primacy. We became more desperate, larger raids to increasingly smaller gains. Throughout all this, humanity did not chase us, nor did they engage in any aggressive acts. They simply sat there, ignoring our advances, ignoring our engagements, ignoring everything. It was as if we were flinging ourselves against a wall that didn't even acknowledge our existence. We realized in order to break through, in order to reclaim our honor, we must push with all our might, using every ounce of strength to crack Sol's defenses. They would not be able to ignore us any longer, and I had planned to lead the charge. Preparations were made, but we were met with setback after setback. Ships' drives began to fail. Entire stations could no longer sustain themselves. Our economy that had relied on these raids could no longer provide for us. And infighting began in earnest. And that was our 6th mistake. For when the battles were over, there was nothing left. I had remained on our world, managing the Emperor's final forces when the ceasefire was signed. The decades following were a slow decline into obscurity. For what was left of our people were now scattered amongst the stars, or starving on our world. With the resources that remained, I had secured a meager fleet, used the last of our resources for a final push against our great enemy. But the ships never left their hangars. We'd run out of fuel. We had no means of acquiring any more, without which we were stuck, unable to even reach for the stars, or even our own moon. We had run ourselves aground. It is now nearly a century since our great fall, and even in that fall I find no solace in the final great battle, or a grand defeat. Instead, we fell because we simply could not fight anymore. A great shame when our final moments were not born of a stronger foe, but because of our inability to fuel our forsaken ships. And now we look into the stars, around the campfires of our crumbling home, and wonder, what could we have done differently? And has our way of life truly been all for nothing? I think about the Linolian's words. Had we not even inflicted a nick on humanity's armor? And if that were the case, then what was all of this for? Our children dream of reclaiming our glory. They war with primitive firearms and some even with swords now. This will be our 7th and final mistake. Humanity has a saying, Amateurs talk strategy. Professionals talk logistics. If that was truly the case, then we weren't even amateurs to begin with. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Everything I use is in the description below. Please let me know and I'll contact the author and we'll see if we can make that happen. Thanks again for watching. It's a scary world out there, but remember to look up and seek the stars.